Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for ladder inspection, maintenance, and proper use, the second webinar in our 2024 National Ladder Safety Month webinar series. My name is Joe Zagrabic and I'm here from the American Ladder Institute. We are excited to be joined by Mike Van Bree, Director, Product Safety and Engineering at Louisville Ladder. Before we begin, a few quick announcements. The American Ladder Institute is a not-for-profit association dedicated to promoting the safe use of ladders. Its members are affiliated with the ladder and ladder component manufacturing industry, and ALI is the American National Standards Institute approved developer of ladder safety standards. National Ladder Safety Month, observed in March and spearheaded by the American Ladder Institute, is the only program dedicated exclusively to promoting ladder safety at home and work. This year is the 8th anniversary of National Ladder Safety Month, and we are excited to bring you a new series of webinars covering safe ladder use. Partnering with ALI for today's webinar is Louisville Ladder. Louisville Ladder is committed to ladder safety through its innovative products and educational programming. All attendees will remain muted for the program. At the end of the presentation, attendees can ask questions by typing them into the questions feature. This webinar is being recorded and we will share the recording with all attendees. The recording will also be hosted online at laddersafetymonth.com. And with that, I'll pass it over to Mike.
Joe, thank you very much for the introduction. Let me share my screen here. Are you seeing my cover slide about ladder inspection, maintenance, and proper use?
Yep, you're good to go.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you all for participating today. Appreciate your attendance and look forward to presenting this material and hearing any questions you may have when we get to the end. So thank you again. So we are talking about inspection, maintenance, and proper use of your ladders, beginning with inspection. So we know that ladders are very helpful to us in our work and when we're either working at home or on the job. So we don't work differently necessarily between work at the job site or work at home. It all begins with inspection of the tool, of the ladder that you're going to use. So we want to make sure that you do that, take that step, that important first step, and inspect your ladder. What do you inspect? Everything. We want to make sure all of the components are in good shape. So the recommendation is to follow a process. I suggest using a checklist, as you can see on the screen here. I also, if you don't have a checklist, would suggest you follow a consistent process, starting either at the top of the ladder or at its bottom at the feet, and just be systematic and go through each component of the ladder. In that regard, we want to make sure that we start out by going through everything, and that means inspecting the labels. The labels are effectively the owner's manual for your ladder. We want to make sure they are present, that they're readable, and that you are able to understand that information. It's provided to you to give all the information that you need to work safely while on the ladder. And that includes the setup steps as well. One of the things sometimes people don't really realize is that labels are an important component of the ladder. They're part of what's considered in the design of the ladder, and they are typically replaceable. So manufacturers make available replacement labels so that you can maintain your ladder. There are instances of OSHA issuing citations if labels are not present or if they're illegible and unable to be referenced or relied upon by the user. So you do want to make sure that you're attentive to that as a kind of a first step. So again, what all are we going to inspect? Going through just some of the key components, like I said earlier, everything, but when we're talking about a step ladder, we would want to look at the spreader braces, make sure that they're opening, closing smoothly, that they don't have damage to them or are too stiff to operate and open the ladder fully. You want to check your steps and make sure that you don't have any damage to the steps or the connections. So looking, feeling the ladder ladder steps and their connections, the rivets, the fasteners that are supporting the steps is a key component. You want to look at the rails. When you think about a ladder, one of the things to consider is a ladder is really a tool that allows you to go from one level to another. So an analogy I like to use is a ladder is really like a bridge. It's a support structure that allows you to go from one level, standing on the ground, for example, up to an elevation to do your work. So we want to make sure that all of those structural components, rails, steps, and the like, are in good shape with no damage, no cracks, no bends, that kind of thing, dents, things that would impact the ability to carry the load. So the fasteners I've mentioned, and also the foot pads is a key component. Whether that's a step ladder or an extension ladder, you want to make sure that you're attentive to the condition of your feet. So with extension ladders, in addition to the feet, you want to again check those rails, those side rails, check those rungs, make sure that they are firmly attached. This is done visually. This is done with your hands, feeling, making sure that you're grabbing and touching and able to ensure the tight connection of the components. You want to check the rung locks, the support mechanism for the movable fly section. And you also want to check any other components such as the rope and pulley and make sure that it's not going to have any damage to it or obstruct the ability to raise and lower the ladder section, the ladder fly section. When we get to the to that inspection, and what do we do if we find a problem? Well, we want to make sure that we address it. Don't just move on and continue to use a damaged ladder. So if necessary, because you found damage, contact the manufacturer if you have questions. If there's something that's not covered to your understanding on the warnings and instruction labels, reach out to the manufacturer. Use the approved replacement parts that they would provide. Don't make any Band-Aid fixes such as, I've seen blocking, wood blocks, or bracing that's been put onto a ladder. Certainly no duct tape, as we show in the illustration here. This is very important, not only for your safety, but the safety of others, because somebody else may be there, see that ladder, be tempted to use that ladder. So we always want to make sure to do that inspection as a first step. So let's jump into kind of the maintenance area. Under the proper care here, we want to make sure that it's maintained in a safe condition so that you have a good experience and its lifespan isn't compromised. So keep it clean. That's not just so that it looks good. That's so that it's not creating a slippery surface or conductive surface. So even though fiberglass, for example, is a non-conductive material, if it's covered with dirt and debris, that can create a conductive path, and we don't want to do that. So certainly want to keep the ladder clean. You want to lubricate moving parts that would need to be lubricated. I mentioned a little while ago the spreaders on a step ladder. If it's too stiff, for example, sometimes a brand new ladder might be a little bit stiff, and a little bit of lubricant on the spreaders can help to more easily open and fully open the ladder before use. But you do definitely need to be careful not to leave slippery surfaces where they shouldn't be. So in your effort to improve operation, you want to be sure not to get lubricants on holding, grabbing surfaces or standing surfaces. So the ladder is oftentimes transported to the job site, and that's frequently done either inside of a vehicle, where you want to be careful not to have materials piled on top of it, or supported on a rack system, for example, on a van or a truck, you want to be sure to attentively place the ladder and secure the ladder so that you do not cause or allow to be caused excessive wear because it's not firmly secured, or wear. If it's not firmly secured, you can also have the wear rubbing, but if it's secured too tightly, you can cause damage by cracking rails, and you want to make sure you avoid that. Excessive heat and impacts are also matters that you want to be attentive to, and you don't want to use the ladder, as we show here, as a storage shelf for other objects. Follow the manufacturer's instructions. That's the key. That's always the key point, is listen to or abide by the instructions that the manufacturers provide. A lot of thought goes into those, and you do want to follow those. So cleaning, lubrication, those sorts of things are somewhat open and obvious. But if it's a ladder that has special mechanisms or things of that sort, special circumstances, certainly be attentive to whatever the manufacturer may be guiding you to do or not do. So disposal of a ladder. If you do find a ladder that's not repairable and it's time to dispose of it, you want to do that in the proper way so that you don't have a problem for somebody else. Somebody may not realize that you've modified a ladder, so modification of ladders is something we certainly do not want you to do. So for example, sometimes if a ladder gets damaged at the end, somebody might decide that they're going to cut it down and just make it a shorter ladder. That's a modification and should not be done. And you might wonder, well, why not? You know, this ladder still has some good life. It just got damaged at the end. I'm going to cut it down. Well, if it's at the bottom, now you're talking about replacement of feet and pretty significant modifications, which you might be fully capable of doing. However, there's an impact on this ladder that you may not understand and appreciate. For example, you know, that construction alteration, is it going to still meet the same strength and stability requirements? How does it impact the labeling? You may understand that labels have specific information for the ladder in terms of its highest standing level or maximum reach. Those are things that could be altered by your modification of the ladder, and that information would then no longer be correct. So do not modify ladders. How do you dispose of them? We recommend cutting down the steps or the rungs. And the reason for that is otherwise it has that same appearance of being a ladder that's reduced in size. So if it's cut down the middle, as we show in the illustration, that's going to make it very clear to somebody that it's not usable, and it should no longer be inadvertently put into service when that's not the intent. Let's jump into proper use. So proper use, we want to be sure that you've got your ladder placed in the proper position and that you're going to climb it appropriately. So let's begin with positioning. Let's start with making sure that you're on a firm, level surface. You'll see this on the labels on the ladder. That's something that the image to the right shows blocking, supporting one side of the ladder. That would be a problem. You also obviously can have instability with this type of a setup, so that's why you need to avoid it. There's, I guess, something to pause here and bring to your attention is if you look at the image with the leveler at the bottom that shows how you can accommodate that sloped surface to the side, that's great, and that's what we encourage. However, it's important to appreciate that if the ladder is being placed on a surface that is sloping perhaps away from the work area, there can be a compound effect of that angle. So the angle that the ladder is placed at, the leaning angle, and the angle of the ground can actually create a situation where you may have a slide out concern that you want to be attentive to. So always try to place your ladder on a firm, level surface and accommodate that with the levelers where appropriate. So don't use the blocking. The tipping or sliding out issue is certainly something that occurs, that we see when we're investigating accidents. People are generally very creative in trying to get their work done. So you want to make sure that you show up to the job site with the ladder that's going to allow proper setup and use. And just have that understanding that if you have a sloped driveway, for example, you need to be very attentive and secure your ladder if you're using it in a sloped situation so that you don't get yourself into trouble. We want to make sure that all 4 feet of the ladder, it's on a step ladder, for example, you want to make sure that all 4 feet are firmly supported on this firm level surface as we've been talking about. We don't want to have anything that's settling down into the ground or tipping to the side or rearward. So 4 feet of a step ladder. Similarly, all 4 rails of an extension ladder need to be supported. As the illustration to the right shows, the top of the ladder is positioned so that the side rails, both side rails at the upper support, are against a solid object. You don't want to balance a rung, for example, against another surface, a pole, a tree, that sort of thing, because now you don't have good stability of the top of the ladder. So if both feet are firmly on the ground, you want both side rails also firmly supported. And you can also see in this illustration that there are 3 rungs extending above the top support point. And why is that? Why do we want that? Well, if you're accessing that upper support, you want to make sure that you, as a user, have the ladder structure to provide that support as you're transitioning onto or off of the roof, off of that elevated surface, whether it's a roof, a mezzanine, whatever that elevated surface is. You want to be sure that that top is properly supported, secured, and you have the extended rails up above, so you've got something to hold on to as you make that transition. So once you're on that elevated surface with an extension ladder, you for sure never want to adjust that ladder once you're at elevation. And you might wonder, well, why is that? I need a little more ladder structure to hold on to, or I want to move it down further along the roof line. The reason you never want to do that is because, well, there's 3 reasons. First and foremost, you can dislodge the rung locks, and your fly section, your movable section, can become disengaged and leave the ladder fly unsupported, and that's a bad position if you step back onto the ladder with the rung locks disengaged. Also, movement adjustment from above can disrupt the feet. So you likely understand that many ladder feet, extension ladder feet, have a swiveling feature, a swiveling action to allow you to place the slip-resistant pads onto the support surface, or if it's soft ground, you have spikes that can penetrate into the ground to give extra support and resistance to movement due to the spike. You don't know what that position is if you've made an adjustment from above. Similarly, you can't ensure that you've got the correct ladder angle, so you don't want to be too steep or too shallow, because those can cause instability once you try to get back on the ladder and climb down. Moving on, we have to make sure that before we climb, We ensure, as I say, spreader bars on step ladders are fully open, locked, and everything's in a stable orientation. On an extension ladder, we need the rung locks engaged and secured. And then wherever possible, one of the key things I think is can be overlooked sometimes is to secure that ladder by tying it off, blocking, bracing, or having somebody hold the ladder, as we see in the illustration. And a improper securing is an issue because now you've got a false sense of security. So there's nothing worse than thinking you're secure when in fact you're not. But that key component, it doesn't really matter what ladder style it is, whether it's a step ladder or an extension ladder. It is recommended that you secure that ladder if you have the opportunity to do that. So the positioning, one of the things we want to make sure of is that it's at the correct angle. As I mentioned earlier, when you're up above, you can't determine that. As this slide shows, the angle, there's what's referred to oftentimes as the quarter length rule, and you can see that in the figure. So the length of the ladder to the top support, you want the feet to be placed 1/4 of that length away from the top support. That means you have to account for things like a soffit overhang or things of that sort. Don't be confused by the extension of a soffit or that sort of thing. If you're placing top of the ladder against an overhang, you want it, the distance is 1/4 of the distance between the ground and the support point, away, horizontally away from that support point. One of the things you'll see on extension ladders, on leaning ladders, is you're going to see a label that explains how to do this in another way, rather than measuring and calculating, that sort of thing. Another way that you can do this is to stand erect at the base of the ladder and put your toes against the base rails. Then you outstretch your arms horizontally in front of you at shoulder level, and your palms should be grasping the side rails at that horizontal elevation of your arms, or alternatively, you can grasp a rung of that base section. And that gives you the proper angle that matches this mathematical quarter length rule. Shallow angles, as you probably understand, increase the risk of slide out. They also are stressing the ladder structurally. If you go through the math on this, a horizontally placed ladder, you may have seen that sometimes on some of the documentaries of people climbing mountains. You'll see ladders used as a plank, and they're walking across a ladder using it as a plank. The concern with that is you've now greatly reduced the load capacity. Generally speaking, you have 1/4 of the weight capacity once it's used in a horizontal position. So taking that 300-pound ladder and laying it horizontally, it's now only able to support about 75 pounds with a factor of safety. That's ballpark. But you can see how significant a reduced angle is in terms of the structural integrity of your ladder. So location is the next thing I want to cover. Make sure that you've got your location secure. Doors are blocked, locked, or having somebody guard them, for example. Don't put yourself in a position where you're in front of an unlocked or an unsecured door, or in an area, a passageway where somebody may be surprised or come around with a cart and disrupt the stability of your ladder. And this isn't a concern just for inside use of ladders. I've certainly seen, and we've had reports of vehicle interaction with a ladder, and that doesn't go well either. So you always want to be sure that your setup area for your ladder is secured from any disruption of the stability. All right, now we're ready to climb. Let's talk about this. We've got our ladder set up. We've inspected it. We've got it maintained. We've set it up. So now let's climb. And what do we want to do? You probably have heard the expression of maintain 3 points of contact while climbing your ladder. And what does that mean? That means to have 2 hands and 1 foot, or 2 feet and 1 hand always in contact with the ladder. Those 3 points during climbing being your hands and your feet. I would add to that, the photo on the right demonstrates once you are at elevation, you don't want to be working just balanced on your 2 feet on a rung of an extension ladder or a step alone on a step ladder. You want to be sure that you're bracing and supporting your body with the ladder and have that 3rd point of contact, if you will, not only while climbing, but also at elevation. So when you do climb, you want to be deliberate, attentive. You want to make sure that you understand your environment. Know the space where you're working. Consider any hazards that may be in the area, anything overhead. Just be attentive to what you're doing and your surroundings. As far as the how do you get your materials up if you've maintained the 3 points of contact while climbing? Well, somebody can hand materials up to you. You can use your tool belt or a tow line to bring those materials up and to do your work once you're positioned in a stable manner on the ladder. Don't climb or stand above a top step or top cap. You might wonder, well, why is that step present? That step is provided for consistency and uniformity of the structure itself, the structural integrity of the ladder, and it's there to provide support, as I mentioned, by placing your body, your legs, your torso into contact with that top step and that top cap. It gives you that ability to maintain a stable stance while doing your work. For extension ladders, that just to make sure we cover that, you want to make sure that you do not climb on the top 3 rungs of a leaning ladder, of any leaning ladder. And again, why is that? That's because if you are leaning against a wall, for example, now if you're on those top 3 support surfaces, rungs or steps, you don't have enough front to back space to stand comfortably. You're basically hugging the wall. So your ability to maintain your balance is compromised if you climb onto those top 3 rungs or steps. So we want to make sure that you have a good ability to balance yourself on the ladder once you're at elevation and working. So continuing on safe climbing, keep your body centered. We see that in the images below. Oftentimes you'll read language on instructions or warnings that say, don't overreach. What does that mean? I believe people generally understand when they're overreaching because they feel unstable and a bit off balance. You want to face your work whenever possible. So work in front of yourself, as we see in the images below. That doesn't mean you can't work a little bit to the side, as we see in the middle photo. But you definitely do not want to turn yourself around on a ladder. And why is that? Well, if you think about what happens when you're standing backwards on a ladder, you're balancing on your heels. You no longer have that ability to flex your ankles and maintain your balance on the ladder. So always face into the ladder, work in front of yourself whenever possible to create a stable work posture. Moving the ladder while you're on it or off of it. We already talked about when you're not on it if you're at an elevated surface. So let's talk about moving a ladder while you're on it. You may have heard of the term walking your step ladder. That's using the flexibility of the ladder to reposition it while you're on it. And that's a bad situation because it can create instability and it can also create damage to the ladder. If you're using the ladder outdoors, be attentive to the weather conditions. Don't get yourself into a situation where the weather is impacting your safety. Certainly things such as lightning and storms with heavy rains and ice and mud and things can impact the stability of a ladder and cause a problem resulting in injury or death, and we want to always avoid that. There are times that weather is maybe a factor, but it's not preventing you or something that you think is going to create a safety issue for you. I would just caution to always take special care if you're in a situation where, you know, after a storm has passed, people are doing cleanup and there can be issues related to unstable structures, tree limbs, for example. There can still be some wind that can create some stability issues for a ladder, things that you might not think of. So always be attentive to the work environment and consider any potential hazards. You don't want to think you're doing the right thing to batten the hatches after a storm, but now you've put yourself in harm's way without maybe fully evaluating and thinking through the circumstance. So definitely do that. Keep your footwear clean. Maintain non-slip resistant surfaces on your ladder as well as on your shoes by, you know, getting into mud or those sorts of things. And be attentive to your health. Sometimes we feel invincible, like we can do what we need to do, and we're not impacted, even though maybe we've been a little sick or what have you. We're going to get the job done. But be attentive to your health. If there's anything that's compromising your balance, certainly listen to your body and your circumstances, and don't put yourself in an uncomfortable or unstable position. On this good health, sometimes people ask the question about age that gets brought up. So again, be attentive to your physical capabilities. What is your strength? What is your balance condition? Those are things that can reduce with age, but everyone is different. So this is one of those situations where I guess you might say it depends. You have to evaluate and make sure that you are comfortable. If you're not comfortable, don't do it. With that, I want to bring your attention to some safety resources for further consideration where you can get additional training materials. For example, Louisville Ladder, we have the Climb Academy. That's our own ladder safety training program for various types of climbing equipment. The American Ladder Institute has great resources. Certainly you can go to their primary website and explore. As you're experiencing now, we're in National Ladder Safety Month, and we do highlight several things each year as a part of National Ladder Safety Month. So make yourself aware of those materials and utilize them for yourself or within your organization. And if additional training is needed, the American Ladder Institute has dedicated training materials and an ability for employers to log the training of their employees and ensure that they are doing what they need to do for the training requirements on the job site. With that, I'm going to thank you for your attention, and I'd love to have any questions. If anything has, if I've misspoken or not covered something sufficiently, please put your questions into the chat box, and I'd be happy to try and address whatever concerns you might have.
Thank you, Mike. As we mentioned, if you have any questions, you can type them into the questions feature. To get us started, Mike, in the beginning, you talked a lot about inspecting your ladder. The inspection process, is that all visual, or are there any special tools that you can use to inspect your ladder?
Well, that's one of the beauties of ladders, I guess, Joe, that it's a good question. Ladders are a tool that, because of their design styles and the built-in factor of safety, a visual examination is all you need. If you're making sure that there are no cracks, splits, bent rungs, bent rails, if you don't have structural damage to the components and they're firmly attached, that is all you need to ensure you've got a good work platform. You don't have to, for example, use a magnifying glass unless perhaps you need corrective vision. But generally speaking, it is only by eyesight and tactile feel that you can make sure things are tight, not visually damaged. Between your hands and your eyes, you can evaluate this ladder pretty quickly through the inspection process.
We have one here that asks, is it prohibited to step off of a step ladder onto a vessel or other platform?
Prohibited is a pretty strong word. What you will see on the labeling and the instructions on your step ladder is that if you are going to use a step ladder, let's start with saying it's not the preferred way to do it. The preferred way would be to have a leanable ladder leaning into against the vessel, assuming it's capable of supporting it. That's an easier, safer transition. If you're using a self-supporting step ladder for access to another surface, you have to ensure that it is secured from side movement, because think about it. It's self-supporting and you are transitioning to another object or from another object back onto the ladder. That necessarily produces a side force, a side load. And step ladders, in order to make sure that you're able to get close enough to your work, they have a taper to them, which gives them added stability, but they're not infinitely stable. They have a limit, just like anything has a limit of strength or stability, and you risk tipping the step ladder over when making that transition to another object, as opposed to a fixed ladder where that extended portion above the surface you're transitioning to allows you to hold the ladder and support your body, support the ladder as you make that transition around the side of the ladder. If that doesn't answer the question, let me know if I need to go further.
Great, thank you. You suggested protecting ladders from excessive heat. Can you define excessive?
Well, by excessive, if your body is not able to be in that environment, I would say that's going to be excessive. So typically when I think of excessive heat, when I say that, what I'm talking about is that don't store the ladder next to the fireplace or some equipment that is generating high heat levels. You don't want to put a ladder into an environment where it can alter the material properties of the ladder itself, either the aluminum or the fiberglass. So a good rule of thumb on that is if you're able to, if it's an environment where you're able to comfortably work, you're fine. If it's been in a fire, let's go to the extreme, the ladder should be destroyed and certainly taken out of service.
The fiberglass side rails are faded in color. Has the material degraded? Is it still safe to use?
Fantastic question. A lot of times, due to exposure to the sun, a ladder that's maybe lives primarily on a truck or a van rack, it's going to be faded, maybe look more washed out. If it's a yellow rail, it might also look white. That color change alone, sure, the color's degraded, the pigment's degraded, but the performance of the fiberglass itself is not able to be determined by viewing the color. Why is that? Modern day fiberglass is manufactured with a protective fabric that coats goes around and covers all of the glass, and that gives it the UV protection. That being said, look closer. If you've got a ladder that is severely discolored, it's quite possible that it's been used or even abused in other ways. So you want to be very attentive to looking for cracks in the corners of any rails, any chips or splits, for example, with fiberglass rails are reasons you would want to take that ladder out of service. But color alone, that's not going to be definitive, but it does probably tell you that it's an older ladder, that you might want to be pretty attentive to the rail inspection as a part of that process of inspecting your ladder.
We have another one in here that asks, is the reason for not climbing on the top 3 rungs of a leading ladder more about the proper support to transition to the surface from the ladder? I'm thinking it has nothing to do with the load capability of the ladder.
That's correct. The extension above an elevated surface is for transition. So for example, if you're just positioning a ladder against an elevated soffit or eave of a house, but you're not going onto the roof, but you're just washing a window or working on a wall, that 3 feet above is not a requirement at that point. The 3 feet above is a requirement when you're going to access the elevated surface. And it's OSHA, I believe the language in OSHA is a minimum of 3 feet. In the ladder industry, we say around 3 feet. We don't want you to get so much ladder structure above your support point that you could have the ladder, for example, teetering against an elevated support. So an example, if you took a 32-foot extension ladder, so 16-foot base section and a 16-foot fly section to give it that 32-foot definition, you wouldn't want to necessarily place that against a single-story home where the gutter might only be, 8 feet or so or 9 feet off the ground, and now you've got a greatly extended portion of ladder above that can teeter on that support point and disrupt the feet of the ladder.
And then we got another one that says, my ladder has a minor dent in the rung. Does that mean it needs to be taken out of service?
Well, and there's a there's a qualifier in there, minor. One person's minor is another person's catastrophe. If you're talking a small dent, for example, from sometimes as ladders are being operated, a rung lock can maybe make a dent into a standing surface of a rung. That would not be a need to generate a need to take the ladder out of service. However, I've seen rungs with a pretty big disruption to the shape that would impact the ability of that rung to support the load. So that's what you want to be attentive to, is if there's sufficient damage that it's compromising the ability of that ladder to support a person of the duty rating. Just imagine if you put your foot right at that small dent location, is that something that's potentially going to result in a structural failure of that rung to support your weight? Alternatively, is it damaged to a level that it changes the distance between the rungs. If it's damaged to the point where you've now changed your distance between the rungs, that's significant because it alters your ability to safely ascend and descend the ladder without potentially tripping, because things aren't where you expect them to be. So you want to definitely be attentive to something that's disrupting the placement, the location of a step or a rung. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Mike. We have another one asking for some clarification around the duty rating. If a ladder has if the ladder type is 1A and has a 300-pound mass capacity, what is the real capacity? I've heard 1,000 pounds. Not sure which one to go with.
Well, we want you to go with what's stated on the ladder. So that 1A ladder rated for 300 pounds is rated for 300 pounds for the person and for the equipment, any equipment or any forces that they're going to be applying while they do their work. So we do not want something to be 350 pounds or 400 pounds on a 300-pound rated ladder. Will the ladder collapse if you put 310 pounds or maybe even 350 on it? Probably not, because we have a factor of safety that is built into the ladder. But remember what I said before about inspection. We make sure that these ladders will not fail based upon a visual inspection of everything being in good order. So as soon as you start to overload a ladder, that changes everything. You are now reducing, you're cutting into your factor of safety. Imagine you're on an airplane and somebody tells you, we can fly further with this airplane, so we've cut the factor of safety in half. Would you feel comfortable getting on that plane? Probably not. So please follow the stated load capacity of your ladder, and don't be tempted to exceed it just because you recognize smartly that an extra 10 or 20 pounds here or there isn't going to make a difference. Well, it does make a difference potentially, and please don't do that.
Great. That was a great Q&A session, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today and to Mike for sharing his expertise with us. We hope you have enjoyed today's ladder inspection, maintenance, and proper use webinar, and we appreciate your dedication to ladder safety. You can find the recording of each webinar in this series online at laddersafetymonth.com, along with additional safety resources. Thank you again to Louisville Ladder for sponsoring today's webinar, and to all of you for joining us and being so engaged throughout the month. Have a great day and happy National Ladder Safety Month.